All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michaela Freeman, and today I'm here with my colleagues Lizelle Garavelli and Molly Greer. We all work at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, or PNNL, and today we'll be talking about the potential to pair offshore aquaculture and marine renewable energy with a focus on co-location in Puerto Rico. And before we get started, I wanted to mention that we are recording this meeting as we do plan to share our portion of the presentation after the event. We will likely clip out the discussion, but if you would not like to be included in that, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll ask that your name not be included with them or just let us know. But I think everyone's on mute for this whole presentation. So feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end. But did want to let everyone know that we'll be recording this and providing the recording after the event. So as I mentioned, we'll be talking today about offshore aquaculture and marine energy, specifically focused on co-location in Puerto Rico. So for today's webinar, our goal is to share information on our research study on co-locating marine energy and offshore aquaculture in Puerto Rico and to report out on progress to date. This research has been going on since 2022, and we've had a lot of progress in the last year, and we are trying to share our findings and what's going on next. So we'll start by sharing some background on marine energy and co-location, followed by an overview of the research study and updates over the past year, and then we'll end with some next steps and time for Q&A. So this research stems from the U.S. Department of Energy's initiative called Powering the Blue Economy that aims to look at marine energy for non-grid alternative markets. One of the areas of focus there's one on resilient coastal communities, looking at desalination or uses for island and remote communities, and then another focus on power at sea, such as providing energy for ocean observations or offshore aquaculture. And that's where our research comes in. So we're focused on the offshore aquaculture portion of powering the blue economy. And we know that aquaculture can help contribute to food security and is a growing sector. As it expands, there's increasing interest in moving offshore for several reasons, including reduced conflict with other coastal uses and reducing environmental impacts. As the industry moves into these offshore kind of higher energy environments, these locations are well suited for marine energy and particularly for wave energy. So this leads us to opportunities for sustainable development by means of co-locating these two marine uses, offshore aquaculture and marine energy. And this image here is our illustration to show some of the potential ways in which marine energy could be used for different parts of aquaculture operations. Of course, today we'll focus on the offshore aspects. So when I mention co-location, I mean marine uses developed within the same space and time scales, but for our work, we also specifically mean integrating and powering aquaculture with marine energy. We have already seen demonstration projects and research worldwide that shown success and overall viability to deliver power to aquaculture operations. So we know this is an interesting opportunity to continue to explore, but there are knowledge gaps that remain, and that's really what we're trying to get at with this research. So the research we're sharing with you today is a multi-year study, as I mentioned, started in 2022, and it builds on previous research that our team has conducted since 2020. And this work is all funded by the Department of Energy, Water Powers Technologies Office. So for those who aren't familiar with marine energy, I wanted to briefly talk about it here. Marine energy is defined as all forms of energy that are derived directly from the seas and oceans, and this includes waves, tides, ocean currents, as well as thermal and salinity gradients. So there's really a lot of options for getting energy from our seas and oceans. For assessing use with offshore aquaculture, wave energy is really well suited, and that's our focus of the research. Wave energy itself is a predictable, reliable, and renewable source that can provide power at sea. Point absorbers, which are a type of wave energy device, are likely best fit for pairing with aquaculture. There really has been no coalescing around a particular design. And as you can see by some of the images I've shown on the slide here, there are many different designs still that range in scales and size. And this is really still an emerging technology that's in development. Its potential to have high costs, especially in these early stages, but we've also seen it be successful around the globe. We've had devices tested in Hawaii, and hopefully we'll have upcoming devices tested, I think, starting next year in Oregon at the PacWave test site. So a lot of potential here and really exciting to see the variety of devices and how they might be fit for different purposes. So, regarding aquaculture, this research has been focused specifically on integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, or IMTA. This can be a type of restorative aquaculture as multiple species are grown together on a single structure, and it can include seaweed, shellfish, or finfish, as you can see in the image here on the right. IMTA offers a sustainable solution to meet growing demand, and it can help reduce environmental impacts by creating this more holistic system together. The one I've shown on the side here is called the Aquafort, which is from University of New Hampshire. And this is really what we've used to focus in on our research and help provide the aquaculture system that we're looking at for, potentially our spatial analysis and other things that you'll hear today. So, my last bit of background I wanted to provide in context is this research is to look at co-location of offshore aquaculture, the IMTA, and wave energy, focused on assessing the feasibility in Puerto Rico. For those who aren't familiar, Puerto Rico's electric infrastructure mainly uses fossil fuels, but there is a movement to shift towards renewable energy sources, such as through initiatives like Puerto Rico 100 called PR 100. As an island nation with viable energy resources, there's opportunity to use marine energy to help increase this renewable energy usage, including, of course, by delivering power at sea to offshore industries. While there haven't been any wave energy deployments in Puerto Rico to date, there have been marine-based aquaculture, and two examples of these are an offshore aquaculture farm in the eastern island of Culebra that successfully produced fish, but due to several constraints, ceased activities, and then also a current seaweed demonstration research project off the southwest coast that aims to help develop sustainable aquaculture. And I've marked both of these locations on the map here. So, with that background and context covered, we'll spend the rest of the time today discussing our research and providing updates over the last year. The goal of this research is really to investigate the real-world suitability and opportunities for co-locating aquaculture and wave energy in Puerto Rico, and really building off past studies that we've conducted. We've done some of these similar steps like spatial analyses in Hawaii and California. And so this is continuing some of that work we're doing to understand what the opportunities are in the United States. So we have three main objectives for this research, which is what we'll spend the rest of our presentation on, and my colleagues and I will share different pieces of the research. Of course, due to limited time today, we're just going to pick out a few key points that we want to share on each of these objectives. So the first objective is to understand challenges and benefits of co-location via outreach and engagement efforts. The second is to assess the potential for co-location of offshore aquaculture and wave energy via spatial analysis. And the third is to explore technical aspects of co-location, such as how to integrate these two uses, permitting, other areas that really haven't been well explored because this is such a new concept and especially hasn't been tested in the US. And we've done this in a few ways. The ways that we'll highlight today is via environmental monitoring and exploring available wave energy technologies. And I also wanted to note that for this objective, we're also developing a guide for co-location, which our team's currently drafting. And so we'll take all of the findings that we present today and put that in that guide for co-location that we aim to help marine energy and aquaculture operators see this as a potential in the future and how they can do this in the best way possible. I'll also note for this objective that we did work with Mana Fish Farms and University of New Hampshire to incorporate perspectives and knowledge from aquaculture. And we worked with Mana specifically to explore integration, understand energy demands of an IMTA system, an area that still needs a lot of research, understanding energy demands to be able to understand what sort of marine energy is required, and then also other technical aspects of pairing marine energy with aquaculture. So with that, we'll jump into our different objectives and highlight some of our research we've done. So the first is to achieve the first research study objective, we've been conducting outreach and engagement throughout the duration of the project, the duration of this research. The goal of this effort was to gather feedback from stakeholders and local community throughout this whole time period of the research study. We really wanted to understand local perspectives and needs to incorporate into our assessments, as well as overall learning, such as for the guide for co-location and other efforts. And we also want to help identify barriers or challenges, as well as opportunities for co-location. And the images shown down on the bottom are from one of our workshops, in-person workshops we did in 2023. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to show a few of the events or the events that we've held throughout this research. We've done this starting in 2022, and I did want to note that for several of these events, we've worked in partnership with Puerto Rico Sea Grant and Conservación Conciencia, and really have appreciated their partnership and helping us connect with local communities and stakeholders throughout Puerto Rico. So some of our events have included online workshops for input into the spatial analysis, an in-person stakeholder workshop, the pictures I just showed in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And this was really to begin to understand various perspectives and identify challenges and opportunities. You'll hear later from our team member Molly about our environmental monitoring. And when our team was there in Culebra, we also hosted a kind of informal in-person meetup with our team as well to answer questions about our research. We've also continued to go back to stakeholders that we've engaged in, such as preliminary feedback on our spatial analysis. And then another thing I wanted to point out is it was suggested a few times that we connect into that PR 100 initiative. And so our team also presented on our research to the PR 100 advisory group. And then, of course, the most recent of these is today's webinar where we're reporting out on our findings to date. So throughout the research study, we've really tried to provide several opportunities for feedback, mainly on the spatial analysis, but as I mentioned, also really to provide input on different opportunities, barriers, challenges for us to understand and incorporate into our research. So while we've received a lot of really great feedback throughout all of the events, today I'll just be sharing some of the key points or feedbacks that we've heard either several times or some things that really felt very important to incorporate into our research. So first is the need to assess feasibility for co-location comprehensively, and that includes considerations beyond only aquaculture and marine energy. So including social and economic effects, supply chain, workforce, job, education, environment, and fishers, and also really the need to balance various perspectives throughout looking at a co-located potential research project and what this would need for the future. Next was the importance of understanding lessons learned from previous developments in Puerto Rico. And this does include, of course, aquaculture, but also other infrastructure projects that are important to learn from, a few of which came up in discussions that I've listed here on the slide. We've also heard many times that this research provides an opportunity to communicate with the different communities in Puerto Rico and to discuss marine energy and aquaculture. In doing so, we know that there's a need to prioritize engagement with stakeholders and local communities, and crucially, learning from them and incorporating different perspectives. Also, this provides an opportunity to explore synergies like fishing or tourism around co-location and potential benefits like food security. Overall, we found that there's generally an interest for continued discussions for co-location, which is great. But as we do that, it's really necessary to understand location-specific needs and challenges. And those include both for co-location, but also that there's essential needs in Puerto Rico that need to be met, and these must be talked about and considered too. Regarding the potential for any future co-location project, we've heard that it will need to be community-led using a participatory approach with transparent communication. And it was also suggested to approve technologies via pilot research project first. And last, we also heard that there may be other interests for marine energy in different communities, such as for desalination or emergency preparedness. So, an interesting thread that we've heard that is certainly worth exploring. So, with that, I'll hand it over to Lizelle to talk about our second research objective and the spatial analysis.
Thanks, Michaela. So as Michaela mentioned, the second objective of our research study was to assess the potential for co-location of offshore aquaculture and wave energy. And to do so, we performed a spatial analysis to identify suitable areas for co-location. In this spatial analysis, we first defined the parameters and consideration necessary for wave energy and offshore aquaculture. These parameters and consideration are based on previous research we performed on a similar topic, as well as on interview with experts and discussion with Mana Fish Farm and the University of New Hampshire. So in the spatial analysis, we included environmental, logistical, and regulatory parameters. I'm going to give you a few examples of these parameters in the next slide. But for now, if you look at the table on the right, you can see some key parameters and associated considerations that we included in the spatial analysis. For example, wave height is important to consider for aquaculture operation and need to range between 0 and 2.5 meters. Wave power density is important to consider for wave energy resources and should range between 5 and 30 kilowatt per meter. The other key parameters mentioned here are current velocities that need to be between 0 and 1 meter per second, bathymetry between 15 and 80 meters, benthic habitat with the need to only consider soft bottom habitat in this research study, and the distance to ports that is between 0 and 40 kilometers. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'm going to describe the spatial analysis method we use to identify the suitable areas for co-location and also show some maps of the parameters that we included. So the first thing we did in our spatial analysis was to overlay different spatial layers. On this map here, you can see some regulatory parameters, such as the marine protected areas in light blue, the critical habitat of some marine species in red, or the habitat areas of particular concern in dashed areas. You can also see like the blue lines, and they represent the submarine cable, the artificial reef with the green dots, and the fish aggregating devices with the triangles. Click, please. On this next map, the logistical parameters are represented, such as the marine vessels track in orange, the heads to navigation with the red circles, the ports with the black flags, and the 40 kilometer distance from a port, and this is represented by the dark blue lines. And on the next map, different types of benthic habitat are represented here. So for example, coral reef and hard bottom habitat are represented in pink, and this type of habitat is important to consider as we want to avoid hard bottom habitat for wave energy and offshore aquaculture. So we can click. So once we overlaid all these layers and we included the different parameters consideration in our analysis, we created this suitability map on the right. And I'm going to describe more of this map in the next slide. So then for the final map, we restricted the suitability results by available wave energy resource. So you can see on the bottom right here that this is a map of wave power density in kilowatt per meter around Puerto Rico. The higher values of wave energy are in red and the lower value are in blue. And you can see that the wave energy is higher on the northern shore of Puerto Rico and Culebra compared to the southern shore. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we are presenting the final results of our spatial analysis. And this map shows the identified suitable areas for co-locating offshore aquaculture and wave energy. You can see the suitability score on the map with low suitability in red and high suitability in blue. And the higher suitability score represents the greater convergence of ideal conditions for co-location. So on this map, you can see that higher suitable areas for co-location are located along the northern coast of Puerto Rico, offshore of the west coast of Puerto Rico, north of Culebra, and east of Vieques. And we also identify suitable areas northwest of the US Virgin Islands. There are two locations of high suitability that we wanted to highlight today. So can you click? Thank you. One on the north side around Arecibo. You can see the orange shapes here, north of Puerto Rico, and one west of Culebra, the orange circle on the right. So based on these findings, we believe that co-location is possible in several locations around Puerto Rico from a technical perspective, but there is a need to work with local communities to understand if it will be a good fit. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we are zooming in a bit on the suitability result, just to show you with a bit more precision where we identified the suitable locations for aquaculture and wave energy. So you can see the blue areas, which is the high suitable areas. They are along the coast north of Arecibo on the left map, and the ones northwest of Culebra on the right. During our workshop, and one of the workshops that Michaela mentioned, Arecibo has been identified by stakeholders as a potentially optimal location for wave energy and offshore aquaculture. And around Arecibo, there is infrastructure such as cargo airports, protected harbor, there is a fishing association, and it is near the university. So this area around Arecibo could be a potential location for co-locating offshore aquaculture and wave energy. For Culebra, as Michaela mentioned, we met with community leaders earlier this year and learned that co-location may not be well suited there at this time. You can also see on the Culebra map on the right that we added the location of the previous offshore aquaculture farm, the Snapper farm that was in Culebra. As you can see, the Snapper farm is located in a white area on our map, which means that we identified this area as unsuitable. And typically, aquaculture aims to be located in low energy environment, which is why it is located here in our case, in an area that is not suitable for wave energy and aquaculture. And so this illustrates the fact that for co-location, we do need to assess both wave energy and offshore aquaculture together, and we do need to consider the key parameters that I presented earlier. Next slide, please. So if you want to learn more about our spatial analysis and visualize all the parameters that we included, we developed a story map, which is an online interactive tool. You can see the first page of the story map on the left and the link and QR code to access the story map here on the right. And Michaela added also the link in the chat. So on the story map, you can read more about our spatial analysis, access the data layers, plot the data on a map, and visualize the suitability results I just showed you. So that's all we have for the spatial analysis. And next, Molly is going to talk about the activities undertaken for the third research study objective.
Thank you. So after we worked through the spatial analysis, we really wanted to understand how well the modeled data that we had matched the real world. Environmental monitoring like this can inform co-location by helping us understand what instruments are needed to measure environmental data, how they need to be designed, how easy they are to put out in the water, and then finally how our collected data match the models we use to inform the spatial analysis. So you can see in this picture on the left, two instruments that we put out on the northwest side of Culebra. The first one that we put out is called a SOFAR spotter buoy, and it rides at the top of the waves to measure wave height, temperature, some wind, and it sends back data in real time. The second one that we put out on the bottom right of the little drawing is called the Nortec Eco ADCP. And what that one does An ADCP stands for an acoustic Doppler current profiler, which sends out acoustic signals into the water column to measure how fast the water is moving. So we were hoping to measure currents. And again, that also has a temperature sensor. We chose this site on the northwest part of Culebra, largely because it was in our darkest blue area. We thought it would be an interesting site to decide whether or not this was the right kind of instrument package to inform co-location. So we deployed this instrument package in July 2023. And we collected data from the SOFAR buoy from July 2023 to mid-November when the SOFAR buoy broke below the midwater float, which is below that orange part, and was set adrift. Luckily, we had really great partners in Ray from Conservation Conciencia, and they were able to retrieve the buoy. And so we were able to analyze that 3 months of data before it broke free. We were set to retrieve the buoy on the right, the ECO ADCP, in late January, but when we went back to Culebra, we could not locate that buoy, and we assumed that it also broke off in mid to late January. So we don't have any data from the ADCP, but because the wave buoy was sending back data all the time, we have those 3 months of data. Next slide. So our first thing we wanted to do was compare the model and the observations. So the model is in blue. This is a Carey-Coos model that shows the significant wave height, which we call HM, or the mean wave period, which is sometimes called TM. And those are key parameters that help us understand how the waves are behaving. So what we saw is that in general, the model found larger significant wave heights than our observations had larger significant wave heights than the model. This is somewhat expected because models often can underestimate wave height, but what is really cool about this, I would say, is that we see that our observations actually hit a significant wave height a little bit higher than maybe is optimal for co-location. So doing these kinds of environmental monitoring might mean that we find out more about a site or find sites that we wouldn't have found just from our modeled data. The other interesting thing to note is that this is just one set of 3 months of data compared to the model. There are also interannual variability that might impact what the wave height and significant and the wave period are like, which could be more different than what we're seeing just with this shorter period of time. So we would recommend that in future co-location sort of investigations that you get a longer set of data. Pass to the next slide. The final thing that we did to understand a little bit more about wave energy technologies was we wanted to understand how wave energy companies were thinking they might change their operations to meet the needs of co-locating with aquaculture, and also understand if they were interested in this industry. So we surveyed wave energy technologies using an RFI, or request for information, to understand what a wave energy device for aquaculture might look like. Some of the questions we were curious about were how big devices might be that would be suitable for co-location. So we asked a little bit about their longest dimension and their power output. The majority of devices that responded were less than 250 kilowatts of power output, and also less than 20 meters as their longest dimension. But the sizes ranged a lot, from 0.6 meters to 45 meters. Obviously, larger devices create more power. Some of these devices changed their designs to better integrate with aquaculture systems. So, maybe they were part of the aquaculture system or one of the buoys on the aquaculture system. And then others were just kind of designed to be connected with a power cable, kind of like, separate from the aquaculture system itself. We received 18 responses from this RFI, and the majority of these devices were point absorbers. Those 13 of them were point absorbers. And one of the takeaways from there is thinking that that's really the kind of technologies that developers are pursuing the most. I'll pass it back to Lizelle.
Thank you, Molly. So we are getting close to the end of our presentation today, and here are some key findings from our research study. First, we found that the aquaculture and the marine energy sectors are interested in co-location, and we found that co-location presents an opportunity for sustainable development. Second, we identified suitable areas for co-location around Puerto Rico. However, there is still a need to examine the feasibility for co-location at a local scale, for example, by assessing the permitting requirement or the social feasibility. And the next steps in our research study, the first one is to continue our assessment of feasibility. For example, we could look at getting a bit more data, or looking at more at a local spatial analysis. And we also want to perform parallel efforts to work toward the demonstration of co-location at a research facility. This will allow us to examine the feasibility of integrating a wave energy system, and an aquaculture operation in situ. Next slide. To finish our presentation, we would like to share some links with you. First, if you want to learn more about our research study on co-locating offshore aquaculture and wave energy in Puerto Rico, please check our website. It's on the left here. If you scan the QR code, it will go directly to the website, and you will also have access to the story map I presented earlier. And with this link, you will also be able to access information on another PNNL research study assessing the feasibility of powering coastal aquaculture with marine energy. So this study is led by Molly Greer, who is here, and Ruth Branch. And if you're interested in more information on the opportunities for co-location of marine energy with offshore aquaculture, we published a report in 2022 with Ocean Energy Systems to better understand the potential for offshore aquaculture as a market for marine energy. So you can access the report with the QR code on the right, and I see Michaela is adding links also in the chat. There is a lot of information in this report, including which marine energy is best suited for which types of aquaculture, information about the energy needs of aquaculture operations, examples of demonstration projects, and opportunity, challenges, and recommendations for moving this field forward. So I'm just going to wait a few seconds, just in case someone is still scanning. I guess, yes, the links are in the chat. So if you miss anything, we can go back. But next slide, I guess. Thank you very much for your attention. And we would like to thank the US Department of Energy Water Power Technologies Office for funding this research study. And we will now open for questions. So I think, Michaela mentioned you can add a question on the chat. So please go for it.
Thanks, Lizelle. All right, we have a few questions coming in, so I'm just gonna quickly go through those. The first question we got was on wave energy technologies. So asked, why are point absorbers the best fit for aquaculture? And I think Molly answered that a little bit in her presentation, but Molly, anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we say that point absorbers are the best fit with aquaculture, largely because they're the technology that the most kinds of developers are making. In some ways, they're the simplest. They're kind of like a buoy, so we can like kind of picture how they might be integrated with the wave energy device. That being said, I don't think that that's like a definitive answer. There's probably, wave energy technology has, as Michaela said, really not converged, and there's a lot of different kinds that might be able to be specifically designed for aquaculture. And I don't know that any developers have really taken on the challenge of designing specifically for aquaculture and changing their devices for aquaculture. So I think while we think that's the most likely in the near term, that's not a definitive answer. Or it's not a definitive best.
Thanks, Molly. And if we're answering your question, I know everyone's muted. If we're answering your question and we're not quite getting at the heart of it, or you want some more information, just feel free to put that in the chat as well. And you can message any of us, and we will do our best to get to most of the questions today. So someone asked, is there a current example of operational aquaculture project powered by wave energy worldwide? I'll start, and then Lizelle, if you want to add anything, or Molly. That's a really great question. So I'm going to go back a slide. So the Offshore Aquaculture Market for Ocean Renewable Energy report here, we tried to collate any current examples that have been going on in the world. That study did happen a few years ago, and I think we have not heard of any since that time. So that still has the most up-to-date research that we're aware of. There are two really good examples in there. Or not just two, but I'll focus on maybe two examples, one of which is in the UK. There was an example of a kind of nearshore finfish farm that put a wave device in one of the net pens, actually, and did provide power during their 18-month deployment. They were actually able to do that within their current permit that they already had because it was within the defined area of their project. And so that was a really interesting example where it didn't take any additional permitting or anything else, and they were able to test that out and show that it was successful. And I know that company is continuing to explore that opportunity. I have that wave energy device that was used in the very beginning on my marine energy slide. So we'll post the slides later, but it's shown there. And then another example, which I think we showed on this slide, the Carnegie More Power Buoy is another good example. So Carnegie is an Australian company, and they're working with salmon farmers in Australia to look at this More Power Buoy, which is actually a feed barge, and their wave energy device combined. As Molly said, there's some examples of this. And so recently they've deployed, I think, a smaller scale version of this and are testing it, but they haven't yet, as far as I'm aware of, connected to the aquaculture operations. There's an international conference on ocean energy next month in Australia, and I assume we'll be hearing some good updates during that conference. Lizelle, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I mean, we have several examples in the report. I have it open, but there was offshore seaweed aquaculture and wave energy in Wales also. And I know some multi-use platform where it was mainly some proposal. They didn't put anything in the water, but in Europe, they were looking for that. So there are at least several projects or ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lizelle. All right, so we have a few questions on the spatial analysis. So the first one is, were migratory corridors and noise impacts to fish, whales, and other species considered during the spatial analysis? I know I have part of an answer to that, but Lizelle, you want to go first?
They were, that's the easy answer. They were not, and mainly because we had a very hard time. We know, and we heard this was an important, parameters to consider the like large whale migratory corridors, but we couldn't find any good data. So I would say if someone has any data that they wouldn't mind sharing with us, that would be great. We're also always looking to refine our spatial analysis, but we didn't include this one.
And I'll just caveat that by saying the data that we're specifically looking for the spatial analysis is like the GIS layers that we can include there. We had heard from stakeholders that this data and information may exist in journal articles or other places, but within the project, we didn't have the capacity to take that data and information and turn it into a data layer that we can input into the spatial analysis. So that's where, as Lizelle mentioned, we need to look at those areas that are high suitability areas and then talk with local communities and stakeholders. And we hope that that information would come to light as we kind of go towards what we're calling like a local spatial analysis and refining some of the information that may not be available as those data sets. And as far as noise impacts, we work on another project called OES, Ocean Energy Systems Environmental. And through that, we look at the environmental effects of marine energy and noise being one of those. To date, we have not seen wave energy devices that have surpassed US thresholds for harm, injury, behavioral changes. And so we know that new wave energy devices will need to show their sound levels in the marine environment, but we don't expect them to cause significant harm. All right. I saw another question on the spatial analysis. I was going to try and uh, consider those together. So one great question, and we don't have a great answer for it, but we are aware of it, is did your model account, and I think by model they mean spatial analysis, account for warming oceans, climate change, and its effect on significant wave heights and extreme weather?
No. Yeah, no, it did not. And Molly mentioned that like the internal variability will be important to consider, and definitely, yeah, the hurricane over there, which are becoming more frequent, would be an important also component to consider in the model. So we really had a few years. We actually had a long, I have it written, but we had like several years of model, but for the purpose of comparing with the observation, it was just a few months, but in the spatial analysis, we had several years of model. There was another question on considering on the ground logistics in the spatial analysis, and I mean, I guess I'm giving the same answers here, but the only one I was trying to think about, I think the only one on the ground is like the ports that we are including. And the rest is mainly like in like marine uses. And yeah, if I think about another one that I forget, I'll let you know, but I think that's the only one we included. Again, more than welcome. If anybody has any idea of something that we missed, that would be great to know, and we would love to, as long as we can find data, we would love to add it in the spatial analysis.
Since you just mentioned hurricanes, I see that there's a question about these. So someone asked, have the ocean turbines been installed in areas within hurricane paths, or are there any case examples of ocean turbine resistance to hurricane? I'm not sure if you're talking turbines, if you're talking about tidal energy turbines. We focused on wave energy here, but I know Lizelle has been actually looking at tropical and subtropical deployments of marine energy devices looking at environmental effects. And I don't know that we've seen any to date. Again, this is a really new industry, and most of the deployments have actually been in temperate locations, a lot of them in the UK. Anything to add, Lizelle or Molly?
No, I mean, Molly, do you have anything?
I was going to say that sometimes devices are designed to, withstand hurricanes. Maybe they duck under the water, and they are designed to behave in these really high energy environments. But I don't know that we've really seen whether or not they can withstand yet, like Michaela said.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues that we work on a project with just messaged in the chat and said a couple of wave energy devices survived very well hurricane force conditions in Europe last summer. So we've seen some maybe analogs, but not in the tropics. Yeah. Okay. Hurricane force condition. Oh yeah, last winter, sorry. Okay, the next question I see, was there much opposition to aquaculture, offshore energy, or co-location from the outreach and engagement activities? And if so, what were they? I think that the response has definitely been varied. I don't think we've heard like really strong opposition or really strong approval, if you will, in either direction. for the most part, it seems like an interest to hear more about this potential opportunity and to really engage in discussions. And so I think that's been a really great place to start from. We've certainly heard a lot of concerns, things that we needed to add into the spatial analysis to be aware of, as I shared in some of our summaries from the outreach and engagement efforts, things to keep in mind, building trust and making sure that the communities are involved from the very beginning. Ideally, it would be any potential project in the future, which we're not there yet. We're just studying the feasibility right now, but any potential project in the future should ideally be really community led with a lot of participation. So I think it'll just depend. As Lizelle mentioned, we talked with the community in Culebra and found that it wasn't really well suited at this time. And so looking at other areas that may be well suited where there's more interest for a variety of reasons, I think that's really important to just understand the locations where it might be best suited, both from a technical perspective as well as from kind of a social feasibility as well. Lizelle, Molly, anything to add there? Okay, we've got a lot of questions, so thank you for sending them. I'm doing my best to try and get through, make sure I'm not missing too many. And Lizelle, Molly, let me know if you see any coming in. Someone asked, this one just came up. So is there opportunity to contribute or support the guide for co-location? And yes, absolutely. We, throughout this whole project, are really interested in feedback. As we mentioned, this is really new stages. So we're just trying to figure out what's useful, what works. I've been trying to dig into permitting for marine energy and aquaculture co-location, which is quite challenging. Marine energy is still very new in the US. We only have a few examples here. We do understand the regulatory context in which they would have to be deployed. We have shown that those timelines are certainly long. The PacWave test site, I think, had about 10 years to get approval. Of course, that was a test site with a little bit more, we didn't know exactly which devices would be tested. So there's a little bit more uncertainty there. And then we also know that offshore aquaculture hasn't yet really occurred in the US. There's a one offshore of Hawaii, but there's been limited deployments there, and that's also been challenging from a permitting perspective. So trying to dig into how to make permitting more potentially efficient or make sure that we're addressing some of those challenges. Are there ways that co-location can maybe help during the permitting process? Maybe things for, kind of baseline surveys that both would need to be done, that you can collaborate together and share costs or things like that, or, different areas where it might help. So for instance, with aquaculture, they typically tend to have generators, which can, have some concerns around them. Could replacing that generator with a wave energy device alleviate some concerns, and what does that look like? So still, of course, very new and trying to understand kind of the environment around these.
There are a couple of questions about offshore wind.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just, to be a bit more precise here, we are only talking in our research study about wave energy. And when we mention marine energy, this is when we talk about tidal energy, wave energy, ocean currents, but this is not including offshore wind. So one question is if the ports would need to be upgraded for offshore wind like it's in California. I mean, we are not looking into that. So, but we do know that NOAA has started to look into the feasibility of offshore wind development. And there is a report that we can probably, I think it's available online, so we can probably find it. And
I know the NOAA folks are on the phone, so if you have the link, I'd be happy to share it to the group.
And there was another one about is marine aquaculture compatible with wind farm? So what we have seen, this is less about powering aquaculture with offshore wind farm. This is more about using the offshore wind areas to usually put maybe like seaweed farm and it's like kind of sheltering It's more about using the same space, less about powering.
That gets a nice segue into a question I saw earlier, which is, would the power generated be just for the aquaculture operation? And this was asking about wave energy. So far, that is mostly what we've looked at is powering the offshore aquaculture system. We have kind of started to probe into, could you also power the vessels, which is a lot of the energy demand? And then we do have other projects that are looking at the shore-based infrastructure. So Lizelle and I have a project in Washington State where we're working with the Jamestown Skolem tribe and looking with their land-based grow-out aquaculture operation, assessing their energy demands and available marine energy resources in the area. Excuse me. And so, yeah, right now we're really looking at the offshore system, but it's possible that it could go to other uses, or potentially if there's a larger wave energy system, that it could also be um, sent to shore or to the grid. Molly, do you have other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I was just going to say that a lot of times the transmission line from a wave energy device back to shore can be a really expensive part of the project. And so we've also been kind of wondering if just using the power on site can help with lower those costs and kind of be more appropriate for the where the technology's at.
Yeah, great point. All right. Someone asked if we're planning to conduct a techno-economic assessment on these IMTA units. That is something that we are thinking about for future research as well. The current research is actually ending this month, and so we're looking at what the next steps are and how we move forward. And we are very interested in the techno-economic analysis and trying to understand better the costs of what this would look like, and some of those other details that we haven't been able to assess just yet. Anything else to add, Lizelle, Molly?
No.
Okay. Someone asked for funding opportunities available to develop co-location technologies. That's a great question. Molly, do you want to take that one? Do you want me to start?
Sure. One thing that's interesting is that there just was a FOA, which is a funding opportunity announcement that I think is closed at this point, for universities to partner on aquaculture topics with wave energy. But there are also typically SBIRs, which is Small Business Innovation Research, right? That kind of come out on a yearly basis that could be good opportunities that sometimes are the specific topic and sometimes are a broader topic of small scale applications. Anything more to add, Michaela?
Um, I think, did you? No, I think that's it. Yeah, that is it. Sorry, looking back through the.
One mentioned an upcoming WTO funding opportunity focused on wave energy in the chat. I don't know what it is about.
Let's
Question
see.
on,
Molly, was there a question?
yeah, the wave environment data were not collected during winter and early spring season, which may lead to a significant underestimation of meaningful wave bottom swell impact from the north and or northwest. And the year 2023 was characterized by significant doldrums in our area. I don't know how to pronounce this. And so therefore the wave energy was underestimated. So do we have any plans to overcome that limitation?
Yeah, I think that that's a really great point. And I think that we are kind of thinking of our buoy data from a couple of different angles. We're able to compare the 3 months of data that we collected with the 3 months of estimated data from that Caracous Swan data. And in that short amount of time, we can kind of see the differences that the model had with maybe what really happened. And from there, we can see that in general, the model also underpredicts wave energy. But that doesn't mean that with just those 3 months of data, we're saying what we expect the wave climate to be long term. We're really trying to understand with putting out an instrument is can we rely on the model data? Is the model data accurate enough that we can use that to estimate our energy production and what kind of factors we might have to adjust to be able um, to get better estimates of what the wave energy device would make or how much power it would make. And so I think that's we can look at it from a couple different angles to overcome that limitation.
Thanks, Molly. One other question that's probably best for you. Someone said, I wonder, does the load profile match the wave energy generated power? If not, how does the mismatch going to supply? In the case of power shortage, how long can fish stay alive without power?
Yeah, that's a great question. In general, the wave energy load or generation profile is um, consistent, but unpredictable. We have modeled a couple different ways where the different energy uses on the aquaculture farm would use that power directly. Maybe they're feeding at different times based on the availability of power. But we also anticipate that there will be battery needs on the aquaculture device, and the size of the battery will be determined based on those questions, like how long do the fish need to be able to have that continuous power, and what's the likely longest amount of time before we get new wave energy power back online.
Thanks, Molly. There's another question, which I think you just answered some of it, but to follow up on the seasonality question, is there a planned method for storing energy and sustaining energy needs through seasonal and or other temporal changes?
Yeah, the battery and wave energy device would likely be sized for the lower energy season so that you would have the amount of power that you would need. I don't know that we've gotten really to that level of detail on what exactly we would design, but would be taken into account.
Thank you. And I just got a message from our Department of Energy colleagues on the phone, so I'm putting chat links in. For the first one is the Department of Energy newsletter for funding, for announcements of funding, and the second is the notice of intent for that funding opportunity Lizelle mentioned. I see we still have some questions that we haven't addressed, but we are also coming to the end of the hour and I want to respect everyone's time. So I'll just end with maybe one last question, which I think someone else, maybe one or two other questions. So someone asked, do future plans include development of a demonstration facility in Puerto Rico for these efforts? It's important to consider demonstration facilities that provides easy and affordable access and capabilities for wave energy technology developers, given the current state of commercialization and some of the challenges that we're seeing. That is not part of our research right now. What we are looking at is, are there existing aquaculture systems or places for research that we could look at putting in a wave energy device there to test it, and then might look at continuing that possibility in Puerto Rico. But something we heard from doing our outreach is to prove the technologies before coming to different communities in Puerto Rico. And so we're trying to really listen to what we heard in that engagement and see if there's other opportunities for testing elsewhere, and making sure that these concepts will work in reality in the US before moving forward with those. Molly, Lizelle, anything to add there? Okay, and then someone asked about ocean thermal energy conversion and aquaculture in Puerto Rico. That's not something we've been looking at. I know that our colleagues are looking at that in Hawaii, where there is a ocean thermal energy conversion associated with the NELHA, National Energy Hawaii Laboratory Authority, that's linked to some aquaculture operations. And we are looking at that actually soon with the Jamestown Skolem tribe as they're growing their seed at that NELHA facility and potential to use OTEC there. So not within this project, but as a different research that we're doing. I think there might have been some other questions that we didn't get to, so I apologize, but our emails are here. So if you have any thoughts, anything you're interested in the future, please feel free to reach out to us. We really appreciate you taking the time today. We will send out an email afterwards where you can find the recording. And again, thank you so much for joining us here today. We really appreciate it, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.